Vivian Dupree watched as the bodies were blown out onto the surface of Harrapin. She would have 15 hours before she'd be able to declare the facility clean. With the afflicted disposed of, now came determining how the breach occurred and the verification of manifests and personnel. At 37, she had already served 22 years within the Exotic Combat Officers Service, ECOS. Standing at a height of just a little more than 5'3", she was perhaps the least physically imposing person anyone would ever meet. But her eyes and her presence were enough to squash any thoughts that she could be discounted. Vivian had come from the Southeastern Alliance sector on Earth. Her father was Laotian and her mother Sudanese, but the nationality and ethnicity designations were really just remnants of a bygone world. After the grand solar flare of 2027, almost the entirety of the world had been thrown back into the Dark Age, which had led to the most violent conflicts of recorded human history. Eventually, the fall was halted and new societies were built. The advantage had been the resurrection of the technology which allowed a more communally shared return to society. At the end of this dark age of humanity, the world was reborn into a new enlightenment, where nations were less political entities and more just area map denotations. Vivian had not set foot on Earth in the last 20 years, not since her first deployment, and that was after 2 years of isolation, security, command, off-world mission training, or ISCOM.
Commander Dupree, of the original 350 personnel assigned to Harrapin 6, 182 remain, of which 35 are currently below in the mining section.
The voice of one of her clean team leads came over the secured communications channel.
Team Leader Silvis, I want you to head up the breach investigation.
Vivian replied over the comms.
Team Leader Ascara, you will secure all data and information related to this incident and the personnel affected. No records or traces of those exited are to remain on Harrapin 6 or within the facility's systems. Team Leader Cass, you will be tasked with the remaining personnel. I want any potential infection or affliction off this facility. After you've completed diagnostics and cleared the remaining personnel, you are to begin memory purge protocols with secondary insertion protocols.
Vivian paused as the walls returned to their position, allowing the disinfection of the platform to begin.
Dr. Lafferty will contact you directly with insertion parameters.
The 3 team leaders acknowledged and set about their assigned tasks. Vivian knew she could extend their time on board Harrapin 6, but she was efficient, and had achieved her position because of this ruthless and unforgiving efficiency. The miners could wait to be tended to until after Cass completed her diagnostics. Once she had the information on the remaining personnel and their assigned duties and specializations, Dr. Lafferty would be able to decide on the memory insertions. The Gayandi 12 Operations Commander Adrian Husserl would decide the fate of the facility. The loss of Harrapin 2 had forced a strain on the trinary system for each assigned section. What would become of Harrapin 4 or 7 with Harrapin 2 gone and Harrapin 6 at almost 50%? She knew what her decision would be, but it was not hers to make.
Section Leader Tobith,
Vivian said, turning to her second-in-command.
I want you to determine whether any contact was made between this facility and the others, the content of the contact, the individuals contacted, and the purpose of the contact, and whether the contact and content was within security protocols. I also want to know if any off-world contact was made and to whom, why, and by what and whose authorization it occurred. For off-world contact, I want a list of clean team assets which are deployable. The off-world is a priority alpha.
Tobith nodded, then turned to head for the central control of the facility. Vivian liked Tobith. He was efficient. With the deep cleanse operations underway, she would need to contact Commander Husserl. The possibility of off-world contact by other facilities would need to be looked into. Harrapin 1 did have access to all other facility controls and communications, but the outside chance a sub-channel was at play was of serious concern. The dedicated communications channel, accessible only to her and Husserl, displayed before her the image of the man. He was not much to look at. He was older than her by a decade at least and was soft-spoken, with an almost jovial intonation in his voice. He was a man easy to dismiss at first sight, and even more so after he spoke. He had no presence or gravitas. He was bland and unimpressive. Still, he was the only man who made her feel uncomfortable when he looked at her. It was not anything sexual or threatening. It was the man himself, because for all of the unimpressive and forgettable qualities he embodied, the mannerisms and almost subservient aura about the man which would make her despise his weakness under any circumstances, she knew better. Adrian Husserl was a commander with the Colonial Deployment Service's territorial expansion. Those chosen to enter the CDS were taken only from the cream of the crop, and territorial expansion designation spoke to only one truth. The man was more dangerous than she was efficient, by miles.
Commander Dupree,
Husserl began.
What is your assessment of the facility, and when might I hope to have a final report to make my final determinations on?
Husserl smiled expectantly. Vivan detailed what actions were being taken and had been taken, and informed him of her concern regarding off-world communications before concluding.
I will have the final report within the next 12 hours.
She held his gaze, which was both easy and yet disturbing for her.
Very good, Commander,
Husserl said, his smile deepening.
I think you have things under control and are doing a fine job. No, a wonderful job.
He paused as if giving her time to enjoy the praise, but it was not condescending, it was genuine.
As to the off-world communications possibly having occurred from Harrapin 6, or any of the facilities for that matter, do not worry yourself. I will tend to that matter. Have your fellow, what was his name? Section Leader Tobith, Commander. Ah, yes. Tobith. A competent man, I imagine? No, please. I have no doubt he is competent. He is your personal section leader, and you are very efficient in your duties. Okay. Let me look into the off-world matter, and I won't disturb you further. But if I can help you in any way, do let me know. We are, after all, a team, and there's no I in team. Goodbye, Commander Dupree.
With the last of his words, the image disappeared. Vivian took a second to look at the blank screen and had only one thought come to her mind immediately. There is an I in team. It's in the a-hole. She smiled to herself, remembering the joke she learned during her ISCOM training. Her instructor for the hand-to-hand and unarmed elimination course had told it. He had written the word team in big block letters, T-E-A-M, and then circled the letter A pointing to where the I was, and said that it was always in the a-hole. Of course, she had no intention of sharing the joke with Husserl. The man might find it funny, or he might see it as a cause to have her exited. Damn the man. He was as friendly as could be, which made him as unapproachable as was surviving on the surface of Harrapin itself. There was probably more chance of building a life on Harrapin than getting on friendly terms with Husserl, she thought. It was now a matter of waiting while her people did their job. As she sat in the facility commander's office, she thought about Harrapin too. At least they had all been exited, which made her job much easier. She didn't mind the job, but with survivors always came an array of protocols to be followed, which then meant new resource dedication for observation and interdiction planning, should memory insertion fail or become problematic. It was just the kind of problem the Candace Terrence woman on Harrapin 6 had developed into. She was the last person exited due to reverberation affliction, as far as anyone on the facility was concerned. You see, during a previous breach, the flu, which killed 27 on Harrapin 6, was actually a memory insertion. Terrence had responded within all required parameters for memory insertion success and memory purge success. When the facility personnel were reawakened, everyone carried on, mourning the loss of 27 of their fellow crewmates who tragically died due to a virulent strain of the flu. And everything had been fine for about 2 weeks. At some point, Terrence began having headaches and night tremors, nothing too severe from the reports Vivian had read. However, given the circumstances, these developments were of concern. But medical was not made aware of her conditions. She had kept a handwritten journal, discovered after her psychotic break and eventual exiting. The bioscanners within the facility, her personal quarters, and embedded in her body did not alert as to the changes. Dr. Lafferty later modified the systems for future issues like this. What made the Terrence situation even more concerning was the resources beyond the monitoring and the interdiction required by Vivian and her people. Husserl had become involved in the matter, and members of Dr. Lafferty's subordinates were determined to have become afflicted, and of course, were exited. At least the report signed off by herself, Lafferty, and Husserl stated as much. And now, as part of the official records, it was exactly what had occurred under established safety protocols. Harrapin 1 was never affected. Harrapin 1 of all of the facilities was the only facility built beneath the surface. The pulse and reverberation were non-threats to Harrapin 1 and its personnel, yet 7 individuals, the entirety of a single team under Lafferty, were afflicted and exited. It was not Vivian's job to question the decisions or why the Harrapin facilities had been established to begin with. The Enquin was important, but was it important enough for the levels of protocol security involved? Having herself as an ECOS was highly unusual, but having one of the only 3 CDS-TE in command was unprecedented for what was nominally an observation and mining outpost. With the pulse and reverberation coming from Gaiandi 12, there was nothing within this system which could be colonized realistically, as the planet was located in the center.
Commander,
Silvis's voice broke into her thoughts.
We have identified the breach point, but it is problematic and we need you on the scene.
Vivian pushed her musings from her mind. Silvis was more than competent and capable. Why had she asked for her personally to be on scene? She apparently did not want to say whatever the problem was over the communications. Sure is smart, that one, she thought of Silvis. She knew Husserl would be monitoring, and having her on the scene would not be out of the ordinary if you didn't know Silvis.
On my way,
Vivian said, exiting the commander's office and heading toward the location highlighted on her heads-up display, designating where Silvis and her people were located. It took her less than 2 minutes to reach the location, and as soon as she did, she realized what was problematic about the breach. She looked at Silvis, and Silvis simply nodded grimly.